To start with, I'll go back, I guess, to my parents that mentioned them first.
I was born in 1893 in Russia, Brezhnev. And then we moved, when I was about 3 years old, we moved to Anapol. And there we stayed until I was about 10, 12 years old, and I worked out in the mill there, sweeping the floors and feeding the horses and the cows. My sister was here since 1902, and she wrote and she wanted me to come to the United States and sent me a ticket. So finally, my sister and myself, we got ourselves ready, and on July the 5th, 1912, we landed in Baltimore, Maryland. Then it took us 5 more days from Baltimore, Maryland, to come to the little town of Goodrich, North Dakota, where my sister and my brother-in-law lived. And naturally there I stayed with them and I started to work. And then one fall, we thought we'd go to California, me and my brother and 2 other friends of ours. So we landed in Los Angeles first. I worked there for a while, and then I came to Lodi.
Grandma, where were you born?
In Quilla, North Dakota in 1891. Then I grew up there until I was 16 years old. Then I came to California. Father picked up the whole family all at once and got on the train.
And you was here when the earthquake was in San Francisco?
Yeah, we just got here the day before, I think, before the earthquake. Anyhow, we saw the fire, from San Francisco, and well, it was something awful, the trees were just going like this, the big oak trees, they were just moving, and well, it was quite an experience, all right. I know I told one of the young preacher boys here in Lodi one time that when I was his age, what I was doing instead of having a chance to go to school, so all I picked up, I took correspondence school for a while, and then I would get a certain word or a certain this and that, and I'd stay with it, and I plugged along, so.
Having both come from North Dakota previously, they met in the Baptist church.
She was singing in the choir over there, and I was usher there, and naturally we got acquainted that way, and maybe after a year or year and a half after I met her, we got married. Baptist preacher married us, but we was married in her home, in her father's house,
Right on Stockton Street. I'll show you the house.
Shortly after they were married, they moved down to Southern California. Mom had a sister down there, so they moved to Pomona, and I was born there September 12th, 1921. Then they did come back to Lodi before too awfully long. I have some documents to prove that. I was registered on the cradle roll in the First Baptist Church February 22nd, 1923. Also, I got a deposit book from Farmers and Merchants Bank, account number 1193. My mom opened this account for me on August 20th in 1923 with a deposit of $30. My guess is by today I probably am #1 on the seniority. This is an old original book. But anyhow, that shows I've been around Lodi for quite a while. We first lived on Oak Street, diagonally across from the First Baptist Church, about the 3rd house from the corner. My aunt and uncle and my dad's sister lived next door to us. The thing I remember about that house in Oak Street across from the Baptist Church is the fact that I had the whooping cough. There was an upstairs room there. It was kind of like a screened porch. And I remember when I was about 4 years old, I had the whooping cough at that place. From the First Baptist Church, my parents went to Bethel Open Bible. About the late 1926, they decided to leave Bethel Open Bible, and they started a church of their own. My folks and my mother had 3 sisters that were involved, and Glad Tidings Temple then was organized by just a small band of people. The way they started, I'd mentioned this theater. They rented that theater and had Bible meetings. Then they bought a little house on the corner of Elm and Central Avenue, just diagonally across from the Christian church. I got the original treasurer's book from Glad Tidings Temple when it started back in 1926. My uncle was the treasurer and the book fell into my hands, and I think again, just for fun, I could read a few numbers out of here and it'd give you a little idea what things were like back in those days when they were just getting started. For instance, Sunday evening offering, $4.21. Tuesday evening offering, $2.75. Thursday evening offering, $1.35. Over on the expense side, rent for the Humphrey Mills, there were evangelists we had, if I remember. I'm just picking this at random. Rent was $6.75. Gas for some meeting, gas for the apartment, $1. So that gives you some idea what things were like. After that, they moved to they rented another building, which is today diagonally across from the Lowell Center on the northeast corner, Oak and Washington. They rented there for a short time, and then they bought property at Walnut and Washington and started to build a church there. And I remember my dad and my uncle Sam Ritz each went to the bank and borrowed $5,000 to be able to construct this church. Now, if a guy were to roll this back into today's dollars, that would have to be $75,000 to $100,000 today. Now, just if you can imagine sticking your neck out, let's say round figures, go to the bank and sign for $100,000 to start a church. So you can see what they did in those days. My first day of school happened to be on my 6th birthday. We lived at 520 East Elm. I walked down to Garfield School, which was, to me at that time, looked like it was an awfully long walk. As I think of it now, probably only about 6 to 8 blocks, I guess. But understand, I went my first day to school, not having met a teacher, no parents to go with me or anything. I just walked with one of the other kids and introduced me to my first grade teacher, Mrs. Martin. Second teacher I had, Mrs. Orff, second grade. My third grade, I had moved over to Lincoln School, which was just a block away, and that was the year that we got out early in May. Because of the Depression, they had run out of money. They didn't have money to provide pencils and paper to the end of a normal school year, and I presume paid teachers or whatever, so we actually got out in May of that year. About that time, my dad purchased the old dining hall up at the Pardee Dam. Those buildings he wrecked, sold some of the lumber, and used a portion of the lumber to build our home out on Highway 12, what's Highway 12 today. During the summer break, 1930 then, in the midst of the Depression, Dad had finished building this house out in the country, had the vineyard there, so we moved out to the country in the summer of 1930. And I started the 4th grade at Lafayette School there, where I had a teacher, Mrs. Smith, for my 4th and 5th grade, and then 6th and 7th grade I had Mrs. Adams, who was the principal. While I was in the 7th grade, I had a problem. I was jumping rope, a high jump. Dad had a garage, three-stall garage, and the 2 posts between the 3 partitions. I had tied a rope across, and I was jumping, using that for a barrier. The only problem is the rope being tied on in both ends. When my heel hooked, it caught me, and I flipped over, and I broke my left arm. And I remember going up to, climbing up on the cellar door. The kitchen sink window was just above the cellar door. And why I did, now I'm in the 7th grade, remember, but I said, "Mama, Melvin broke his arm." And that's really where I grew up. That to me is home. Although the home has since been moved away, and I don't know where it went, but I was there from 4th grade through high school and up until the time I went into the service in World War II. I'm going to go into the Great Depression, which I don't know too much about. I was young, but I do remember some things. Dad, when he bought this vineyard to build this home on, he had to borrow the money for it, obviously, or most of the money, from an old man by the name of Mr. Schinkel. What I remember about it, though, is the fact that Dad could not make the payment. So I went to Mr. Schinkel, and he said, I can't do it. I don't have the money. He said, you can have the place, I can't do it. And Mr. Schinkel gave him back the words, Otto, if you can't do it, I can't do it. Just stay there and do the best you can, and pay me whatever you can when you can. I can remember grapes being sold for down to $2 a ton. Now, if you go to the store today and you buy a pound of grapes, well, you pay $1, $1.50, or just think, for $1, you could have purchased 1,000 pounds of grapes. You couldn't have hauled them home in a pickup. My first bike, I remember, that was purchased in Stockton for $5. Before I had the bike, I had to walk to school. Used to walk home for lunch. I used to go barefooted. Everyone makes fun of that, but it was no big deal then. I remember the time, living out 5 miles at the time, you didn't go to the store every day for something. Generally, you purchased your groceries for a week. And I can remember very well the time my dad gave my mother a $5 bill and go to town to buy the groceries for the week. And she came home with change. She didn't use the whole $5. Water glass eggs. I don't know how to describe that, but they had the big 10-gallon crock down the basement. They put some kind of a water solution in the eggs, and that we were able to keep the eggs when the hens laid more eggs in the summertime than in the wintertime. When they were molting, then you had the eggs to use. We used to make root beer instead of buying the Pepsi or whatever you get in cans today. We made our root beer 5 gallons at a time, bottled it, corked it, and put it in the basement, and we had good root beer. Lodi Nut Company, at that time, it was originally called Stone Nut Company. We used to open walnuts for them. We got $2 a sack for opening walnuts. So I remember a lot of winter nights just sitting there and cracking walnuts to make a few, a couple dollars now and then. We picked hops out in Clements, that again just to make a little extra money. The thing I remember about that, though, you're supposed to pick them off and put them in the sack, but my dad, he wanted to make a lot of money, so he went and stripped the whole thing. And you strip and you've got all the leaves and all in that. When we lived out west of town, and asparagus truck tipped and dumped a whole load of asparagus, so that was a real treat. We got to eat asparagus wholesale. We got the canned asparagus. We lived just about a half mile from the Western Pacific Railroad tracks, and we used to get a lot of hobos there. The train would stop opposite our home or somewhere there, and guys would get off, and they were everlastingly at our door asking for food. My mother, I guess she always fed them as far as I can remember, never turned any of them away. So that, I think, more or less covers what I want to say about the Depression. High school, I remember going into band, and I just come from a country school, and I got into the intermediate band. Mr. Halsey had me move up to the regular band. And there were 3 trombone players there. They were all, I guess they were all sophomores. The day came when, not too far down the road either, when the band director told me to move up to first chair and push all these 3 guys down. Boy, I didn't feel very good. I didn't ask for it, but that's the way it worked out. Probably the biggest deal we did get to do was we played for the dedication of the Golden Gate Bridge in 1937. And that was not only a big deal, but it was a long march, because we marched from the Golden Gate Bridge uptown. Now that's more than 6 or 8 blocks. Another thing I mentioned about high school, I'll go to my U.S. history class, and Mrs. Graham for a teacher. She was an old lady. Our classroom was on the first floor, the northeast corner. It was next to the auditorium, and on the front side, on the street side. And we used to think that she couldn't hear and she couldn't see. And so, for the fun of it, one day, I climbed out the window. And I honestly did it. I climbed out the window, out to the north, I still remember, and came around through the door and came and sat down. We did have a lot of fun in that deal. Going back to the band, I changed from the trombone to the baritone in my senior year. The way that came about, I had a cousin, Bill Hildebrand, came from North Dakota, that summer between those 2 years, and he had a baritone, and he had it laying in our house, so I just fiddled around with it during the summer. When I went back for my senior year, I just walked into the baritone section, sat down. I never asked Mr. Halsey, I never told him anything. Well, he didn't like that at all, but I remember his words, "You better cut the mustard or out you go." I graduated from high school in June of 1939.
After that, well, I stayed home and worked about 6 months or so on the farm. I helped my dad prune, drive his tractor and all things like that. And then in November the 4th, I guess it was, 1939, I decided to go to Humphrey School of Business in Stockton. And there was I got my education in stenography, for which I was trained.
They got me a job at United Boat Lines in Stockton. So I worked for them a short time, but only a short time. The first work I did that I can remember being paid for was pruning for my dad on that vineyard out on Highway 12, and I got a half a cent a vine. Now, if a pruner can prune real fast today, you could do maybe 1 acre, which is 435 vines in a day. I pruned nowhere near that. But so at that rate, if I had been able to prune a whole acre a day at half a cent a vine, I'd have made $2.17 a day. But I couldn't have pruned that fast. That gives you some idea. When we used to work in the vineyard, I remember it was a man by the name of Bert Lynn, and he used to he'd get a lizard and he'd put it on his hat while I was working, and the lousy lizard would stay there all day. So I finally thought I'd try it too, and I got a lizard and I put it on my shirt and I wore it to church. And it never moved. Honestly, I wore a lizard to church on my shirt. Never moved. I don't know, I can't explain it. I can't believe I did it, but I did it. During this time that we were at Glad Tidings is where Evelyn's come in. I hadn't mentioned her. I figured she was going to be here doing her own talking, and it was at Glad Tidings Temple, Walnut, Washington, that I first met Evelyn. It was Paul Pipkin, I guess, was the evangelist there at the time, and Leona Zeisler at the time, who's today Lee Waters in our church, had told her about coming over and meeting me, and so that's where we actually met, and that's where we were married in May 14th, 1947. I had mentioned the Stone Nut Company earlier, where my mother had worked, where we had opened walnuts for and all. I actually, after I got out of high school, I think it was 2 summers, if I'm not mistaken, I helped and knocked walnuts. We got 25 cents an hour, if I remember right. We worked from 7 in the morning till 5 in the evening, I think. The only thing is, you had to be at your work site to start knocking almonds at 7 o'clock. And a lot of the almonds we knocked were down in Oakdale. So we loaded up a truck over, which is today Lodi Nut Company, about 5:30 in the morning, and drove down to Oakdale, and by 7 o'clock we were ready to start knocking walnuts. One other job one summer I had was up at Thornton Cannery. The only reason I remember that, I can't remember what working or how much money I made or anything, but I was canning at least. And one time for fun, I took a small can, and I took a little next bigger size can, and I filled it with juice and put the little can and canned that can. Then I put that in the next bigger size, and I canned that one. I put it up all the way from the smallest they had up to a gallon, one inside the other. I often wondered who got that can and what they thought and how it turned out for them. Another job I did was sulfuring, and I'd love to have a sulfur machine. I thought about putting it, because I still got one out in the shop, and you strap it over your back and have 20, 30 pounds of sulfur, and then you pump 2, 3 pumps per vine, and that would get pretty sore across here. I can remember that very well. December 7th, 1941, that's another day that actually shook the world.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
I remember I was in church that morning. It was a Sunday morning, Glad Tidings Temple, I remember coming out, walking down the steps, and I got about halfway down the steps, and my cousin Laverne Keene, he hadn't gone to church that morning, and he gave me the news that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor in a sneak attack, and so from that minute on, everything changed for everybody. In the month of January, within weeks of that time,
A federal man came through and asked me to sign up to go to Washington as a stenographer. Well, it was quite an opportunity. I realized that, so I thought I might just go and grab it as a chance. So I filled out the papers, and he said, well, it's okay, and he asked to leave though on Sunday, so I've already got my ticket now, and I'm going to be leaving tomorrow for Washington, where I'll become a junior stenographer for the federal government.
my dad and I took a train out of Sacramento on a Sunday night, and we headed for Washington, D.C.
We had a wonderful trip. We started out from Sacramento about 11 o'clock on the Challenger. And we kept the same car right straight through till we got to Chicago. We got there about 8:30 Wednesday morning. And in Chicago we had to change depot, and we took the Pennsylvania train over there. And we landed in Washington, D.C. about Thursday morning about 9 o'clock.
When we got there, Dad went to the Assembly Church, was Full Gospel Tabernacle at 921 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest, and did some inquiry and was able to find a room that I could stay at.
How did Melvin like the city?
Well, he didn't like it at all. He wanted to go back home.
I worked in the nomenclature section of the Storage and Issue Division of the Materiel Branch of the Signal Corps of the War Department. That's where I actually worked. Physically, I worked in temporary building M, which was really just diagonally across the street from the Lincoln Memorial. So I had ate lunch over there a lot of times. On days off, I was able to go to Baltimore, by the way. I went to Philadelphia. One time I even made it all the way to New York City, I remember. So I really got around. Was I homesick? Was I lonely? Yeah. I used to go to the Union Station, spend a lot of time there. That was kind of great. Kind of took your mind off of being homesick. But I didn't last too long there. So in April, I came home by train. I came the northern route. I stopped in Goodrich, North Dakota. It was all snow there, so my cousin Ed Concha came to town on horse and wagon, got me from the train. Then I went through Spokane, Washington, visit aunt and uncle and all my cousins up there. And then I back home on the farm again for a while till I went into service. 3 days after my 21st birthday, I rode the bus to the Presidio Monterey to be inducted into the service. I was assigned to Camp Callan down north of San Diego, which was they called it the Country Club of the Army, and it was a great place to break in. It was beautiful, but it spoiled you maybe. I did go to Camp Davis. It's about 31 miles north of Wilmington, North Carolina, I think. Interesting thing on the way, we rode the train back there, and I went through Washington, D.C. I got to stay there for, I don't know, we must have been there for a day or two. And I was actually up in the top of the Washington Monument, looking down when Franklin Delano Roosevelt rode the inaugural parade on his third and final inauguration. So that was quite interesting to see that. I'm sure today you could not be up there when the president's being inaugurated because of the fear of things today, but I was commissioned on April the 8th of 1943. From there I went to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. Fort Bliss was an old cavalry post. They had a beautiful camp, really. They had brick buildings for the officers and non-commissioned officers. But when we got there, we were in anti-aircraft, and instead of living in a situation like that, we lived in tar paper shacks on the side of a rocky hillside. And I was there during the summertime, so it was miserable. Okay, against this backdrop, me being in the anti-aircraft on that rocky hillside, living in a tar paper shack, just down the field to the east of us, about 2 miles down, was Biggs Field. B-24s flying there. And we'd be laying out on the firing range on the hot sun on our elbows or firing rifles and stuff, and we'd see these big B-24s do their crosswind leg and then turn, and do their final approach right over our heads. So a whole bunch of us got an idea, how about getting in the air? Of course, this looked like a real deal. So quite a few of us put in for a transfer. And fortunately, it came through. How we ever got it, I don't know. When it came through, I was out at Camp Oro Grande up in New Mexico. And I was so thrilled to get out of there. Some of these things I don't remember how. But I got a Jeep somehow. And I drove back to camp. And I literally illegally checked out of that camp. I had some guys turn in some of my stuff. I had a fear for a long time that I would hear eventually that, they would catch up, but I guess the Lord protect me. I never did get caught, so I got out of there. But from there, I got to go to the Air Force, and that was great. I was assigned then to the San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center in San Antonio, and that was like going from hell out of heaven, really. That's the way I have to describe it. The food was good. They treated us good. We had a good church. It was a good town. Spent 9-10 weeks in training there and was assigned for primary flight training to Victory Field in Vernon, Texas. We flew the PT-19 there. I love to fly upside down in that little PT-19. That was a lot of fun. The only trouble was you fly upside down and that gas pump wouldn't deliver the gas. But they had what they call a little wobble pump on the side. If you pump that thing, you could pump gas into it even if you're upside down. So I remember I'd just see how long I could stay upside down and pump that thing like mad to keep gas going and fly upside down. I used to love to fly upside down. I went from there to basic in Garden City, Kansas. I was there for 9 weeks. The pastor there was Reverend Marvin Blodgett, who happened to be the brother of Charlie Blodgett, the little yeah from our church. So that was interesting. Leroy Cease was there at basic at Garden City, Kansas. So I sold him my 39 Plymouth and bought a 41 Ford there. Then my advanced flying was done in Frederick Army Airfield, which was just really across the river, 15-20 miles from where I'd done my primary in Vernon, Texas. So I was almost more or less home again. I used to go back to the same church and all. The only thing is now I was flying a twin-engine airplane. And, you go from the little PT-19 to the BT-15 in basic, and, boy, you see all those instruments. And, phew, I'll never learn all this. 9 or 10 weeks later, you got it mastered, you're flying it, and you take another step, and now all of a sudden I got twin engine. Everything is double, and boy, you're flabbergasted again. But eventually you get through that. Some of the interesting things about the UC-78 I've mentioned before, but if you got the right plane, they were not all the same, but if you got the right one, you could slow fly them down to 33 miles an hour. Now 33 miles an hour is not very fast. You can get a wind 33 miles an hour, you're standing still. When you get a wind of more than 33 miles an hour, you're backing up. So that used to be a lot of fun. Another red letter day for me then was finally May 23rd, 1944. That was the day I got my wings. Graduated with a class of 44E. I was given about 15 days in delay en route to go to Sedalia, Missouri for my transition training. I wanted to go home, but remember this is gas rationing. They don't supply gas to go home. They supply gas or allow for the gas to go from Frederick Army Airfield to Sedalia, Missouri, which would be maybe 500 miles. But back in Vernon, Texas, they had black market gas. We used to buy gas for, I think it was about 15 cents a gallon. But if you asked for 25-cent gas, that was black market gas. So you didn't have to have ration stamps, and they would give it to you. Or at least we knew the station where we could get it. So I had a 20 or 20, I think it was 25-gallon drum. I laid it on the floor behind the in front of the front seat, on the floor behind the front, and asked for a fill up of 25-cent gas, which they obliged me with, and headed back to Lodi. The trouble was, like I said, the poor tires. Early tires were bad. Tires during the war were bad because they used reclaimed rubber. So I headed home toward Lodi, got between Grants and Gallup, New Mexico, and I blew a tire. Somehow they gave me a tire. I don't know how I got through, but I did get a ration tire, so I was able to make my way to Lodi, and actually I made a 3,000-mile trip instead of a 500-mile trip. I went to Sedalia, Missouri. I spent there about 4 or 5 months, I guess it was, in transition on on the C-47. I became a first pilot there. While I was there, we made trips to Dallas. I went to Kansas City, and we did one flight over Hillsborough, Kansas, where Evelyn was going to school, and that was a lot of fun. She was down there in class, and we had the back door out in the where the paratroops jump out. We had the back door open. The guys were out there waving, and we buzzed the town a few times. And she got to come out from chapel with it, I guess you were, and got to see us go over. After our 4 or 5 months there, I went to Bearfield, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, New York Harbor, and on December 15th, we boarded the Queen Elizabeth. That was we loaded during the night, I remember. It took a number of hours of loading because we loaded 20,000 troops on the Queen Elizabeth, which is a small city, or a fair-sized city, in fact. The Queen Elizabeth was built for 2,200 passengers, and we had 20,000 servicemen on there, so you can imagine it was loaded. I remember staying in stateroom A20. It was a stateroom built for 2 people, and there were 6 of us in there. They double, triple-decked the bunk, so there were 6 of us in the stateroom. We zigzagged across the ocean without submarine escort. They said it was so fast that they didn't need escort. Zigzagging didn't give the U-boats time to really sight on in. At our speed, we were able to go unescorted. So we went to Greenock, Scotland. There we took a train to Greenham Common, which is about 60 miles west of London. And there I was assigned to the 90th Squadron of the 438th Troop Carrier Group. We used to fly supply missions. From England, we flew across the channel over into Germany, supplying food, blankets, blood, gasoline, cots, you name it. In the service, I had a lot of fun because we were instructed to fly low for our own protection. So we took advantage of it and played it up to the hill. When we were first stationed in England, we used to cross the channel a lot, and I remember the little French fishing boats out there, and I remember coming right at them just like I come at that camera, like that. Pretty soon you see these fishermen flip into the water. I remember in southern Germany when they were out digging potatoes, and they threw potatoes at us. We were down low on the ground. They were throwing potatoes at us. We didn't even have a gun to fire back. I remember the guy on the bicycle coming down the road at him, and he was riding his bike, and we got too close, and he ditched, and he went into the ditch on the side. He got off his bike. After we were in England for a while, we were moved to France to be closer. Our trips wouldn't be so long. We moved to about 12 miles east of Reims. General Eisenhower had headquarters in Reims. We were about 12 miles out of town, east of Reims. Again, we lived in tents there. We dug trenches right behind our tents for protection. And an interesting thing was there, just 5-10 feet away, were old, broken up but still existing trenches from World War I. So we had World War I and World War II trenches, literally side by side. I mentioned what we carried. Toward the end of the war, Patton got going so fast that they just couldn't keep the gas tune fast enough. So we spent a lot of our time toward the end flying gasoline into him. We'd burn about 750 gallons on a trip, but we carried, and I got one of the cans yet. I don't know if this is one of them, but it's one like them if it isn't one of them. And this is the way we carried the gas to Patton. 150 of these cans in a C-47, and we carried 750, we burned 750, but we got the gas to him where he wanted it and when he wanted it. In fact, sometimes we got close enough, we could hear shooting up ahead, and toward the end, remember, the Germans were moving so fast. The Patton was advancing so fast that I remember going into a German mess hall and seeing food left on the table. They didn't even have time to clear the table. They ran for it. And Red Letter Day, May 8, 1945, was VE Day. Now things were winding down. I was in a field called R-73 by designation, It was at Landshut, Germany, which was just about 30 miles northeast of Munich. After things quieted down there, after they signed the armistice, we moved again to a place called Amiens. When we finally left, we flew out. I was lucky I was able to come over on the Queen Elizabeth, and we were able to fly back on our own planes. Anyhow, we took off from Scotland, I think it was, and we flew, and we flew up to Iceland, and I remember seeing Iceland about 200 miles away. We were flying pretty good altitude, and that's where the air is totally clear up there, so we were able to see Iceland some 200 miles out. After 11 days, we got out of Iceland. We flew to a field designation BW1 in Greenland. From there we went to Goose Bay, Labrador, and finally to Bradley Field, Connecticut, where we took a train for Fort MacArthur in San Pedro, California. August 15th, 1945, that was Victory in Japan Day, VJ Day. And that was the day I actually rode the train from Fort MacArthur, San Pedro, up the valley to Lodi, getting out of the service. And that was a day of great celebration because every town, every place we went, people were dancing in the streets, horns were blowing, whistles blowing. It was excitement. It was a great day to come home on. So that was the end of the service for me.
Well, the whole town was really celebrating. We got off of work about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon so we could celebrate. There was confetti and, oh goodness, the horns were blowing. And then your train came in was it about 6, 7 o'clock at night?
Yeah, probably was.
I don't know, it came in later on. And, oh, it was so exciting when they got off the train. You weren't the only serviceman, were
No.
you? No. Of course, he was the only one I saw. And it was real exciting.
To me, it was go to work in a vineyard then because it was just a natural. Dad had the vineyard, so I just sort of naturally fell into that, and that's what I started doing. So I had plenty of work right off the bat.
And
And you were at D&D at the time.
I was working at D&D Tire Shop. Did general office work. Got engaged like in January of 1947. It's before we were married.
how old were you when you were married then?
I was 19. I was
19.
married, almost 20. I had grown up, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what I wanted.
The same thing you wanted when you were 12.
Yeah, let's think about that.
Well, anyhow, we were married in Glad Tidings Temple, May 14, 1947.
I'm happy to present to you Mr. and Mrs. Melvin O. Helmle.
Our pastor at the time was Mark A. Hinman. The man I probably always will think of as my favorite pastor, for some reason or other, was at the age I was at the time, or was it the time being at the end of the war or something? I don't know, but anyhow, I always thought a lot of Mark Hinman.
We got to San Francisco at 4 o'clock in the morning. That was late.
And we had scheduled to be in Crescent City the next night at a motel. So there was no sleeping in. We had a long ways to go the next day.
We went up real early next morning. We went up the Redwood Highway.
Up the Red Highway, we were up to Washington, visited some friends I'd known there. My goal was always to get to the Indianapolis races. That was kind of a high spot. Watched the races as a boy growing up, and so we had planned to get at the races. I had tickets for it, so we managed to get in on that deal. And that was a real high point.
Can I tell you, go back
Go ahead.
a little bit? He had me out at his parents' place. His parents were in Los Angeles. And he lit the fireplace that night, and
This is just before?
before he had asked me to marry him.
Oh, okay.
And he was telling me all about this trip that he'd like to take. And he had the whole thing planned out. And then when he got through, he says, "Would you like to go along?" I says, "I can't, I'm working." And so he took care of that. And And I
You got
said,
to go
yes,
along,
I
yeah.
got to go along.
How long was it? 2 weeks?
Month. Almost a month. Where else did we go? We went to Colorado, wasn't it?
Colorado Springs was interesting. Cave of the Winds, Pikes Peak, Garden of the Gods, Manitou Cable Incline.
Can I tell them what I told you today?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. You won't mind.
Okay.
We got home about 1 o'clock in the morning to his parents' place, and we went upstairs to his bedroom, and went to bed. In the morning he got up real early and went to work in the vineyard. And I got up and I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to go downstairs. And so I sat around and did everything else, went up to bed and just waited and waited, and finally I had to go downstairs, so I finally went downstairs. But he never came in. I had to eat breakfast by myself with his mom, I guess, or his mom was there.
Well, how long did you said that Grandpa and Grandma were moving into town and that you were in that house for a while? How long did you live with them? A week?
We actually,
It been a little longer than that, but it wasn't long.
and then we were there about a month, were we, at the place? Or was it longer than
A
a
little
month?
longer than that, I think. Yeah.
Then we bought a home on South Stockton Street, the little vineyard in the back. And we had to fix that up, do some painting and so on, and then we moved to town.
This was 945 South Stockton Street, and since the house has been moved away and it's been taken in by the cannery, so the actual place is not there anymore, but I remember very well the spot where it was. Like you said, that's where Lemoyne was born. Let's see.
Stanford.
At that point, I remember I put out a clothesline on rollers. Remember, it went from the tank house where you did the washing out to a telephone pole across the yard. And the thing I remember about that is one time we had 52 diapers on that. 52. Remember that?
Did you have an electric washing machine?
Yes.
Where'd that come from?
Wasn't that the first Christmas present? Maytag, remember Maytag? It had a card made out or something. I think that was your first Christmas present.
From you? Yeah.
I mentioned that Harley Davidson I bought, surplus, Army surplus. When we were in there, and this happened down along the railroad tracks, I found a set of iron wheels, like from a lawnmower or something. So I made a little tiny trail out of it with iron wheels on it, and hooked it up behind the motorcycle, and gave Lemoyne a ride in that thing. It bounced like crazy with no springs and no rubber tires. He looked dumb in there with a little helmet on, but I gave him some good rides behind the motorcycle.
Well, do you remember when Lemoyne was born? He was out in the field, and I needed to go to the hospital, so I called my parents. And they took me, and we got to the hospital, and I didn't feel anything, so we went back home. Got home, and I needed to go again, back to the hospital. And this time, they wouldn't accept me because I didn't bring money along.
Oh.
So my dad says, well, he'll go and get some money. And then Dr. Weisky came, my doctor, and he was very angry at the hospital, wanted this. And Lemoyne was born before you got back, wasn't he?
I think so.
Yeah. Did you want to be a father?
Not necessarily.
No more than you want to be a grandfather, huh?
Mel, were you always a vineyard? I mean, you always have vineyards?
Yeah, it was just like I said, natural, because Dad was there when I came home from the show. So I just sort of naturally fell into it.
Yeah, I guess that was one thing. Didn't Stan mention something about that? Wondering if there was something else that you had ever wanted to do other than...
I would have loved to have been a statistician. I love statistics, stuff like that. So I thought I would probably love to have been a statistician. Whatever that would have involved, I don't know. But I did think about going down to Southern California, working aircraft factories after the war too. I thought about it, but
So you were
hard
happy
thinking.
being a farmer and...
There's a lot of hard work. The plus, I think, was the fact that you didn't do the same job all year long. You pruned, then you worked in the vineyard, and you irrigated, you hoed, you sulfured, you watered, you harvested. Through the season, it was always changing. Just like I liked to change when I was in the service, stay one place for 9 weeks or 10 weeks and then go to another one. It had some of that same feel too, so that part of it I like. The other part, we wanted to go to the fair when everybody else had it on Labor Day, Saturday and Sunday. We could go on Tuesday or Wednesday when the crowd wasn't there. So that was an advantage too. But as far as the work itself, it was hard work, and it was always disappointing in that you didn't make what you thought you were going to make or what you should have made. And so it was always, well, next year, next
Just
year,
around,
next
success
year.
is just around
A lot
the
like
corner?
gambling or the depression, prosperity is just
Prosperity.
around the corner, but you never get to the corner.
Well, tell about a second home.
Second home, we moved out on Altier Road, just east of Elliott Road. Bought 80 acres out there with a little tiny house on it. We remodeled that, brought it up to snuff at the time. Stan was born while we were there.
No, he was still going to town. We were in town. And he started to walk out there. Stan was 8 months old and he started to walk. We didn't mention anything about Lemoyne's feet.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, you talk about it. Anyway, they brought Lemoyne in to me at the hospital, and I knew the nurse, and she was crying. She was really crying hard, and she said she was asked to tell me about Lemoyne's feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What is club feet?" I had never heard of club feet before, and so she said, "I'll bring him in." And of course, when she brought him in, he had cute little feet, little toes were all there and everything, but his feet were turned in and under. And he had a bad case of it. And then the doctor came in afterwards and he told me that they would put him into casts and try to correct it that way. But I was always grateful that it was his feet and not up here, because he was always a very bright little boy.
You said your brother also, Eugene.
Eugene had one club foot. And you
I
had...
had a cousin, Leroy Cease, that had two of them, so
Oh.
family on both sides, really. But Lemoyne's was bad because it was not only turned in this way, it was turned in this way, so it really like this. So he couldn't stand and balance. He had to go like this all the time to keep his balance, otherwise.
But that was
he
after he
couldn't.
was in casts for
You know,
6 months.
The casts
After
were
he was a
after
little
he had
older, yeah.
surgery, right?
No.
They did casts.
This was when he was a baby. He was 2 weeks old. They put casts on.
Oh.
It was very hard to bathe him. I'd have to have a stack of towels under him to keep his feet raised up so the casts wouldn't get wet. And sometimes a lot of problems with that.
and I'm sure that being in those things, that restriction made him nervous.
Right.
Just like we were in a claustrophobic situation where you couldn't invite, you want to, so he couldn't sleep at night. He just couldn't go to sleep. He'd bend over the crib and rock and bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. Sometimes we'd take him out in the car at night and just plain drive all over town, just back and forth.
He did
Get him to
that
settle down a little bit.
so that I could get some rest too, because I just couldn't sleep. And so he took him out when I drove 60 miles, didn't you? Put on 60 miles one night just to...
He was riding in the new Packard.
Okay.
Well, then he went to Shriners too. That's
How old was he
that.
when that
It was
took place?
about 2.5 when I went to Shriners.
So the casts were on how long?
6 months, and then we took him off because he cried so much.
And they didn't really do anything.
And we just didn't take him back again. And it cost us $30 each week when they changed it. And $30 was a lot of money, but
Whoa.
Grandpa paid for it.
They changed the casts every week?
Yeah, every week. And so anyway, we just let it go, but the feet turned right back again. So when he was 2.5, Mr. Sugar from the Farmers and Merchants Bank was a Shriner, And he signed for Lemoyne to go to San Francisco to Shriners. And Lemoyne loved his bottle. He really loved the bottle a lot. And even at that age, he still had a bottle.
The blanket?
Well, the blanket wasn't as important as his bottle was to him. But I asked him if I should bring the bottle along, if I should have him weaned before. And they says, well, if he likes the bottle, just let him have it. So we were at Ike and Alana's overnight, and the next morning we took him to Shriners to admit him. And you know, I forgot his bottle. And when we got there, I thought, well, I'll go back and get his bottle, but they said, no, just let it go. And I thought maybe they'd give him another one or do something. But they didn't. So when he got there, he lost both Mel and I. Well, first of all, they put him into the wheelchair, took him down the long corridor, and then they asked us to stay behind. And when he looked back, he saw that we were left behind, and he screamed and he cried for us, and I can still hear that awful screaming and crying. And but we couldn't go any further. So he was put into an isolation ward then, without a bottle, all by himself, no other children around, in an isolation room, I should say, a glass room, because they were afraid that he may be bringing in some childhood disease. He had to be in there a week before he could have his surgery. But we didn't touch him again until he was in hospital for 3.5 months. We could see him from outside the building. And
that was on a second-story window, and we had to look up.
Noisy San Francisco, we tried to talk to him, and he would cry, the door is over here, the door is over here. And we says, we can't come, we just can't come. He couldn't understand. But that was real hard on us and him.
Didn't you say you had Christmas, or you delayed Christmas or something?
He got home on the 29th of January, and then we had Christmas for him, his Christmas. But all the evening he cried, he wanted to go back to Shriners.
That made you feel real good, didn't it?
As soon as he opened up his gifts, then he wanted to go back to Shriners.
He
Okay.
apparently bragged while he was in there. My daddy could do this, my daddy so. When he got home, he was telling my daddy this, my daddy that, my daddy.
That made you feel good.
The other thing is, he got out of the crib after surgery. He was thirsty, and fresh casts on, cut up from here to the.
From his toes clear up to up here. Well, up here.
And then he couldn't get water, so he took it upon himself to climb over the rail and go and get his own drink.
We found this out from one of the nurses. Okay, let's talk about Stan real quick and about Jan right now. Okay? This whole time Stan was at home and loved the attention he got finally. Before it was all annoying. Now finally Stan got some attention too. We loved that.
How did he feel when Warren came back?
Well, we moved while Lemoyne was gone. We moved from that house on Peltier to where you know, on Davis Road. And when Lemoyne came home, he didn't only come home, he came home to a strange home. Real strange, because he had never seen the place. So it was a little hard. I could see why he cried that
I mean, how did Stan feel about all of a sudden you don't remember?
I don't remember that.
Because you said he enjoyed being the only child.
Yeah, he enjoyed all the attention that he got. He finally got out on the tractor himself and decided he would drive it like his brother did. You know, make it go like that. Yeah.
Was Jan born when he was at Shriners?
No. She was the first one born at that house. The first
House had
baby.
been built in 1918.
Wow.
She was still the first one born there.
So they gave her a $50 war bond, I guess. Was there a war bond?
It was a war bond. I thought it was a savings bond. War
Well,
bond.
savings.
Yes,
Called
that's
war
the-
bond.
Oh, it did the same thing?
Shortly thereafter.
because she was the first baby born in that home. She had colic so bad that she cried night and day for months.
Did you drive with me
3
too?
months. She cried.
I said, did he drive with me too? I could get a little.
Thank you, did.
Never driving.
The only way she'd be comfortable was laying her on my tummy. And that was the only way I could get some sleep, was putting her on my tummy. And I was always afraid you'd fall off, or I would roll over in my sleep and crush you. So,
I would have screamed. Don't get to worry about that.
okay, I know that now. All right, what else about your daughter? Oh, when we brought her home, the boys were so happy.
That changed.
Oh, they were so happy. They ran over the back of the sofa.
Which they never were allowed to do.
Never. But they were so happy to have you as their little sister.
Or you home.
I don't know which. Okay, come on, Mel, you talk.
Moving along a few years, I'm thinking of those, that triple tricycle. First we had a double tricycle. I
We had a
took
triple tricycle?
before you were along, we had a double. I took the front wheel off of a second one, which is a little smaller than the front one, and hooked the fork over the back of the front one, and we wanted to get in front, pump, and Stan was sort of like a semi-trailer behind. Well, when you came along, then I made a third one, so we had a three-way deal, which was, I thought, real kind of novel and cute. Worked real nice. We used to have that little metal bin, tub, I should say, a little bigger than a bathtub by dimensions. We use it for washing lug boxes, but later on, after we didn't use it for that, we put casters underneath it, and I used to give the kids rides or get on the one end and spin them around. They had a lot of fun in that. What else did we do? Now the boys had a tree house out there. We used to have a lot of fun in the tree house.
The great tank.
Moving along farther on yet, then we had the big machine shed, a 40 by 60 machine shed with a beautiful concrete floor. So we used to go skating out into there. Had roller derby, had our own roller derby. Great tank. Let's see.
Swimming.
Yeah, in the gondolas, the grape tanks, we hauled the grapes in during the off season. You fill them with water, and we actually had a nice little swimming pool. So since we didn't have a real swimming pool, we used to use that. Kids got to go swimming in that. What else did we do out there that was different?
Halloween party.
Ooh, boy, we had some Halloween parties.
Everybody still talks about that.
They used to chase me.
Oh, yes. You tell about that.
No. This is my tape.
About the rooster that chased you? You remember that rooster that chased Janice? That's where Stan rescued you one time. Because he was really after you.
I had a rooster get me one time. I carry the scars for years. I don't think you can see them. But they got spurs. And that crazy guy jumped up, and then a lot like the goose worked his wings, they worked their spurs like this, zing, 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 zing. And he had me punched in from both sides real good. Can be vicious too. So you're lucky you didn't get caught with a spur. They can be mean.
And then the kids went to Ray Union School.
We went a lot farther than I thought we were here.
Yeah, well, we're running out of material. We're just jumping.
We didn't write anything down, that's why.
The Halloween parties in that
Oh.
machine shed, that'd be worth going over though, is we had a side door. They were forced to come in there. We had a lot of lug boxes, so we made actual trails like you do in a fun house sometime in the dark. They had to find their way through. We had pieces of tin we laid on the concrete floor, and underneath the tin, before we put the tin down, we put some sand down. So when you walk on that tin with a sand underneath between the tin and the concrete floor, it really grinds and creaks and makes a horrible noise. Other times we had bed springs. I had to crawl in over bed springs.
In the dark.
In the dark.
Complete
We
darkness.
had the disc blades one after another, so instead of a smooth floor, you had this little bit of dip and going around like that. We used big blocks of ice. We put one end to end to the other one. They didn't have to crawl over the ice blocks. Another place we had the 250-gallon drums. We had the ends knocked out of them, welded two of them together, and put them on rollers. So people had to crawl through the 50-gallon drums, and while they were in there, you could take a roll of things, so you'd really mess them up. That was just part of getting in. One time we had them go up the stairs, because we had a partial upstairs, and then we had borrowed a great big slide, which was...
No, the coffin first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, we had down below we had the coffin on 1 or 2 years.
Upstairs.
Upstairs.
Ooh,
That was upstairs.
I was thinking it was downstairs,
No.
underneath there.
We had a real coffin.
Anyhow, they had a
No.
coffin with... Go ahead, you got it.
We had sort of a dummy in there, didn't we? And everybody was supposed to view this dummy. But we had somebody underneath the coffin with their hands in ice water, and we grabbed their legs to scare them. And then we got to the big slide.
And the slide was a high one, it was more than a normal playground slide. It had come from a home where they had taken in some kind of people or something, and they used it for a fire escape from the second floor. So that's the way. Anyhow, when people entered up upstairs, and then in order to make the grand entry, they had to get on this slide down into there.
I don't even remember the house, haunted house, like once. How many years did you have it?
3 years, I think. 3 different times we have had it.
But the last time was when we had the slide. And we had booths.
Yeah, I remember
Booths
that.
inside.
Concession
Like
stands. And
games and things like that. How long do we have, Don?
About 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
The only thing you asked was they did
Oh.
different. The only other thing I could think of was one thing was, one Stan used to make.
Forks out of grape steaks.
Not much to say about that, huh?
They used to make forts out of grape steaks with
Not too many people do
Jeffrey
that.
Moore. You don't want to talk about that, huh?
They drive them in the ground, or they
They
just pile them up.
They would stack them.
And it was a huge pile. Huge pile.
I
of
think she
grape
probably remembers that because they probably didn't allow you to
steaks. Yeah.
come. That's probably why she remembers that. Oh.
It seemed like a huge pile too. I don't know, maybe it
was.
wasn't as big as I thought it
Very
was.
high.
Seemed
We
like
had to
it
finally
was.
ask them to take it down because it was too dangerous, it was too high. Okay. How many more minutes now?
Just a couple. You want to give a testimony here before you
Okay.
go?
Testimony.
Sure, a
Have
testimony.
Well, cut it just for a minute?
The Lord has been very, very good to us throughout these years, hasn't he? There were many times when we didn't have money to work with, but we always made out.
Well, I have mentioned before, I became a Christian at a children's church in Glad Tidings Temple in the basement where we had services by a couple of evangelists who held children's services in the afternoon. So that goes back to 1927, which puts it back about 68 years now. Yeah, I guess that's about it. So that's a long time. In camp meeting up in St. Helena, California, I received a baptism one summer when I was up there. It was 1939, I believe that was. So I've been in the assemblies since 1926. I think I mentioned that the other night. I guess I could mention the heart attack I had in 1987. The best way I can put that is what the doctor told me. He said if 100 men went into the hospital in your condition, 95 wouldn't come out, only 5 would. He told me that one time. Then a year or two later, he added some more figures to it, which makes it a little more dramatic. Yeah, he said after 6 months, you would have lost half of that 5%. Now you're down to 2.5%. And then at the end of a year, I think he'd lost half of that or something. So time he got through, he had it down to 1 or 1.25, 1.5% would be left. So I was in that very small percentage that made it through. So it was a miraculous recovery. As far as my feeling today, I feel great. You see me eat. That's
And
proof
walk.
I'm not taking care of
Ride the
myself.
bicycle backwards?
I used to walk, and I don't seem to get around to that anymore. So whether the Lord just being good to me or let me live on borrowed time, you stop to think. The Bible says 70 years, and I'm 74. So something else comes to mind there too. My dad lived a ripe old age. I used to tell him when he was young he wouldn't live to be 40 years old because he moved so fast. And he lived to be close to 94. And he used to tell, I guess there's a scripture in the Bible somewhere mentioned about long life may be given to you if you honor your parents. And he always felt that he had honored his parents, or at least his mother, because his father died when he was young. And so he sort of attributed his long life to his honoring his parents. And I suppose maybe I could more or less say the same thing as I move beyond 40, beyond 70.
Ways beyond 40.
Maybe it's having to do something with honoring my parents. But the Lord has been good to us.
Give us 3 good children, huh?
Good wife and 3 children.
Oh.
Got the good children.
Financially was rough, yeah. I've often said, farmers, it would have been better if we could have lived with a little of this money along the way, instead of suffering all the way through, and then when you finally come to retirement, you sell your place, then you get it all at once. And then Uncle Sam takes his big slice off the top. Had we had a little bit of it rationed out as we went, we could have enjoyed it more as we went, and Uncle Sam probably wouldn't have got the same percentage out of it either.
Well, I love you.
Cut.
Cut.